we know what happened in the end. So
This park was at a higher level of performance. You can absorb some of those challenges.
And I think the fact that it was very, very successful in its opening few years.
But above all, it was wonderful.
but yeah, it was just subtle hints like that was a little bit of a hint that things that probably weren't going as swimmingly as it was before.
Hi. Sam, we're on the Dodgem car.
If you're a mid-adult, you might have had past experiences with amusement parks or attractions as a kid, like going to the local fairs or shows. You'd be riding the Dodgem cars with your dad as he always commanded to drive, going on the sketchy carnival rides that feel like they'll collapse when 100 kilograms is placed on the seat. Not fat shaming, instead blame these companies. Or perhaps buying an entire tub of fairy floss that you somehow finished within the nick of time. But this all sounds rather plain. Surely as you grew older, you'd be looking for something a bit more thrilling, perhaps your first roller coaster. Oh, when I say roller coaster, please don't think of this. If you ask me, what is a good first roller coaster for a 7-year-old? Yeah, I can't answer that. But in all seriousness, there was one park in Western Sydney that may have been your home park as a kid, and also contained roller coasters that may have been your first ever coaster. This is the story of Wonderland Sydney. Surprisingly enough, Wonderland's history is very well connected with Luna Park Sydney's history. In the 1979 season, Luna Park, an amusement park located in Milsons Point, went through its worst year in history since opening its doors in 1935. On the 16th of April that year, 13 people were injured on the Big Dipper roller coaster after a steel runner came loose, causing the coaster train to suddenly stop mid-ride. This then caused another coaster train to crash into the stopped train, causing the injuries to occur. If you're not sure what a steel runner is, it's basically a metal sheet that guides the train's wheels smoothly along the wooden track, which is an essential compartment for wooden coasters. If that wasn't enough, things got even worse 2 months later. On the 9th of June 1979, the Luna Park's ghost train caught fire, causing the deaths of 7 people, including 6 children and 1 adult. Yes, 6 children and 1 adult. The fire caused major damages around the park, including damaging half of the Big Dipper and other nearby attractions. Some of you watching may have heard about this fire, and if you're wondering what exactly caused this disaster to happen, yeah, don't ask me, I wasn't even alive. But in all seriousness, the cause is still based on judgments and opinions. The case never ended up being solved, but looking at news articles, most people say it was either an electrical fault, arson attack, or some idiot that lit it on purpose. If you want to learn more about this story, you can watch the Netflix documentary, which will hopefully give you a deeper understanding of what happened. Luna Park immediately closed after the fire and reopened in 1988, closing again, reopening in 1995, closing again, and reopening in 2004, with the current version still standing today. If you want to learn more about Luna Park Sydney's history with more detail, consider watching these videos by Maloney's Coasters. He will in fact be a part of my interview section later, so stay tuned. After Luna Park was shut after the ghost train fire, it meant that Sydney now didn't have any sort of amusement park or a place with rides and attractions. Well, that was until the early 1980s, when a group of developers revealed to the Sydney public that they were looking for an area to build an alternative, being a whole new amusement park for Sydney. The location of this new park would be in Eastern Creek in Western Sydney, which is much further away than where Luna Park is located, being right next to the Harbour Bridge, a kilometre away from the Sydney CBD. The initial plan that was given the green light was constructing a 219-hectare park named Australia's Wonderland. The construction was able to be done with the help of the New South Wales State Superannuation Board and also a number of sponsors like Coca-Cola, Fujifilm, Ampol and Peters. Wonderland officially opened its gates on December 7th, 1985, to almost immediate success. On opening day, the park had 3 themed areas: Medieval Fair, Gold Rush, and the most famous area being Hanna-Barbera Land, where the rides in that precinct were themed, featuring the cartoon characters from Hanna-Barbera like Scooby-Doo and Yogi Bear. Wonderland also took a lot of inspiration from Canada's Wonderland in Toronto, as majority of the rides constructed at Wonderland were inspired by or exact replicas and clones of Canada's Wonderland rides and attractions. An example would be the Bush Beast, which was the flagship roller coaster for that park, manufactured by the Taft Broadcasting Company. However, the layout was a mirrored layout designed by Curtis D. Summers, who already built exact replicas at parks like California's Great America in Santa Clara and Kings Dominion, located just outside of Richmond in Doswell, Virginia. The layout stood almost 30 meters tall and had a top speed of 56 miles per hour, which was marketed as the tallest and fastest coaster in the Southern Hemisphere. The park also featured a smaller family wooden coaster called the Beastie, and several other family and kids attractions spread across the different precincts, all manufactured by international and local companies. Some notable ones are Zamperla, Huss, and Vekoma. Throughout the park's opening and the park's eventual closure, Wonderland was absolutely thriving, and it was clear to see that visitors had clearly moved on from Luna Park and wanted to keep coming back to Wonderland, not just because it was the only amusement park in Sydney at that time, not counting Luna Park Sydney's constant reopenings and closures, but also because Wonderland was Australia's largest amusement park and had the most variety of entertainment upon others. After the amazing financial success with the park, the developers were already planning to expand after just a few years since opening. In 1988, they rebranded as Wonderland Sydney, plus adding a seasonal water park known as The Beach, which featured mainly body slides like a freefall, speed slides, and an aqua tube. In 1990, a wildlife park was added, 1995 saw a new restaurant, and in 1992, just 7 years after opening, a new precinct was added known as Transylvania. This land featured the Demon, which was a Vekoma boomerang coaster, standing 38 meters high and had a top speed of 43 miles per hour, and also a large-scale Intamin drop tower called Space Probe 7. In 1994, a log flume was added called Fred Flintstone's Splashdown, an Intamin double Ferris wheel in 1989 named the Zodiac, and a bunch of other smaller family attractions that made the park noticeable to visitors that drew the tourists in from other Australian states or perhaps other countries. Unfortunately, despite the park's amazing success rate with expanding every couple years or so, something went terribly wrong in what I believe is one of the most infamous times of Australian theme park history. At the peak of the park's success rate in the 1992 season, all of the parks in North America operated by Taft Broadcasting were rebranded as Paramount Parks and sold to a company called Viacom. However, Taft only owned a minority share in Wonderland, meaning they only owned part of the park, not the full establishment, with the rest of the ownership coming from all the sponsorships the park had. This ownership was then bought out by Australian investors instead of the Viacom company. While the parks in North America are still running smoothly under the current ownership of Cedar Fair, Wonderland received a new ownership in the 1997 season. This was a Malaysian-based investment group called Sunway, the name that is still a burden on me. Their ownership of Wonderland lasted 7 years until the park's eventual closure in 2004. It was clear to see that they had much less interest in expanding than the previous owners had in mind, hence why Wonderland only received one more ride, a cable car relocated from the Sydney Showground. Sunway soon realised that Wonderland would be too expensive and less profitable to maintain. This became extremely noticeable in the 2002 season when Sunway started shutting down areas and moving the rides closer together, with the goal of downsizing the park while keeping the park's most popular attractions like the Bush Beast and Snowy River Rampage. This also caused several rides to be scrapped in the process. Not a lot of information has been released on why Sunway decided to invest in a park, as it was already expanding rapidly a few years ago, but with Sunway doing little to no improvements, the visitor stocks dwindled little by little, and tourists no longer wanted to take the long drive out west of the city for a park that would mostly be the same year after year. However, Luna Park Sydney made a reopening comeback in 1995 when they opened the second iteration of the Big Dipper, an aerodynamics custom looper, which caused majority of Wonderland's visitors flocking to Luna Park, as it was a competitive option being much closer to the CBD. The feedback given was that Wonderland would need to re-establish their appeal in the Sydney market in order for them to entice more visitors. Sunway, however, barely did a thing. After Sunway's failed attempts to revive and downsize the park, they announced Wonderland's closure on April 26, 2004, with the gates closing for the last time that night. CEO Stephen Galbraith created a long list blaming the closure on multiple factors, with some examples being the 2003 bushfires, the SARS virus, the bird flu virus, the Iraq War, September 11 attacks, the Bali bombings, and the Asian financial crisis.
If this park was at a higher level of performance, you can absorb some of those challenges, but it wasn't in that situation at all.
Sunway officials responded saying they blame Wonderland's closure on everything except poor management, which is pretty outrageous to see in my opinion. After the closure, Wonderland stood abandoned for 1 year, following most of the rides to be sold to other parks. For example, what was formerly known as the Demon is now known as Recoil, located at Wonderland in Hyderabad, India. Finally, in August 2005, the signature attractions like Beastie, the Bush Beast, and Snowy River Rampage were demolished after almost 20 years of serving happy guests. The park replaced an industrial estate containing a variety of warehouses, offices, and some large department stores like Myer and Bunnings. All of that listed is still standing here today, with the only evidence of Wonderland being a road still named Wonderland Drive and some scattered and abandoned park remnants in the nearby bushland. While you may have seen, watched, or read several news reports throughout 2015-2016 with talk of rebuilding the park, I'm going to be honest, Wonderland is very unlikely to return. Considering how Sydney is at this stage with multiple new residential developments throughout Western Sydney and also the cost of living crisis affecting most principals, developers may not even get a chance to even buy the needed land. It's very unfortunate that Sunway decided to not invest in the park wisely, which could have had so much potential, but instead creating a financial mess for them which they couldn't manage appropriately, causing the park to shut. But all this information I've given to you is just from my perspective. What about others? What about people that have had past experiences with the park? Perhaps made connections or even discovered their best friends they still have today? Let's dig a little deeper into the depths and find out why this park truly mattered to society.
Hi, my name's Kieran. I run a YouTube channel called Ejected Bear Time,
So, my name's Jake. I run a channel called Maloney's Coasters.
which is a coaster enthusiast YouTube channel where I show the perspective of riding coasters as a big and tall person.
It's largely based around theme park and roller coaster history, science, reviews of theme parks and roller coasters. And I am originally from New South Wales, so a lot of my channel is based around Australian theme parks.
I also co-run a podcast with fellow YouTuber Maloney's Coasters called Total Bear Loney.
And the first question is, do you think you saw any change in the park's behaviour leading up towards the closure? And would you have guessed that it was going to close from a visitor's point of view?
I think the behaviour of Wonderland really changed after the Sunway Group bought it. So there was pretty much a complete stop of any new rides, new attractions being added to the park. But I do think it still came as a little bit of a surprise.
I know that Hanna-Barbera Land the name Hanna-Barbera Land had been taken off. I don't recall what the name of it was, but I just remember the text wasn't on the rainbow archway that you went through to get into that land. You didn't really see the rides being removed and moved at that point. I think that happened a lot closer to the end. But yeah, it was just subtle hints like that. The fact that they'd lost the Hanna-Barbera licensing, that was a little bit of a hint that things that probably weren't going as swimmingly as it was before.
What was your favourite themed area in the park and why?
My favourite themed area in the park would probably be, I would say Transylvania was probably the best themed area. Sort of had sort of the spooky gateways and, you had the Demon and Space Probe 7 as it was back in the day before, they'd lost the license of using the naming rights for Channel 7, so then it just reverted back to Space Probe.
Oh, see, I didn't get to go to Wonderland myself, but I think the area that interests me the most is probably the Gothic and horror themed area, which included the Demon, and I believe the Space Probe was also part of it. I don't think that's something that we have in Australia at the moment, other than, you could argue Scooby-Doo Spooky Coaster. I think theme parks kind of stray away from horror and Gothic theming a little bit in Australia, and I'm very interested by what a park could do with it, so Wonderland's version was intriguing.
Was the collection of rides and attractions solid for a park of that size, and if not, what could have been changed?
I'd say it probably, in its heyday, had the most solid collection of rides in Australia for the time. I'd say Dreamworld probably came and took that crown around the time that they installed Tower of Terror and Giant Drop. But when you look at the fact that it had a relatively well-rounded lineup of coasters, including one particularly large wooden coaster, a coaster for, thrill seekers. They had quite a large collection of flat thrill rides. They had a rapids ride. They had a flume. It was a very, very well-rounded theme park for its size.
I definitely think that it was batting above its weight for the time. The collection of rides was, quite good. The fact that we had, I think this was the only inverting roller coaster in New South Wales. I think the only one prior to that was the Thunderbolt at Dreamworld. And for what was essentially just a Vekoma boomerang, which we look back on now and think, oh, okay, not that big a deal. It was a big deal at the time. I don't think it had a huge amount of money behind it, but the money that was thrown into it, which for its time I think was a decent amount of money, it was well done and people really put a lot of effort into it.
What do you think was the most iconic TV ad or commercial?
Commercials for the park. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Back in the 80s and 90s, people put their everything into a jingle. They put so much effort into it. And it was, there was one particular one where it was, I think it was like a kid having a dream and then walking through the park as it lit up at night. It was great. And it was one of those things that it would get stuck in your head. You'd be like, there's a world I'd like to live in. A world I'd like to see. It was like you could tell they'd put budget into it. They've got had a cast of thousands of extras and all of their Hanna-Barbera characters in costume. It was really well done. And you'll look back on it, everyone's got mullets. It's really dated, but it's amazing.
Oh,
I think all of Wonderland's ads had that very classic jingle style, kind of similar to Dreamworld's like One Day Holiday kind of vibe.
Well, since Kieran obviously had prior experience, he said his favourite one was the "Wouldn't it be wonderful walking anyway?" That was his favourite.
Yeah.
The kid that was in his bed dreaming and stuff, that was his favourite one, and I totally agree with him on that. The first time I watched that, I was just like, this is peak for
Actually,
1990s.
That one is really good, and the song does stick with you. So I totally agree now that I think about it. Yeah.
Do you think opening Wonderland a few years after the Ghost Train fire at Luna Park was the right move? Why or why not?
Well, I think that Wonderland kind of proved in its opening years that it didn't really affect it, because it opened 1985, so that's 6 years afterwards. I think it was distanced enough from Luna Park to kind of not really have that reputation hanging over its head. And I think the fact that it was very, very successful in its opening few years shows that people weren't really worried or associating it with that. I do think it was the right move. Obviously, it was a tragic event that happened at Luna Park back in the day, but you talk to people my age and sort of millennials were probably too young to have experienced what happened at Luna Park. So I think it was more about an opportunity for families to build memories in a different setting that didn't quite have that kind of negative connotation attached to it. It was, to me, it seemed like hearing about the Ghost Train fire at Luna Park was something that had happened years prior. It was before my time. So while I can't speak for sort of people who are like parents of people of my generation, for like us kids, it was sort of very far removed from us.
Which park is better, Wonderland or Luna Park?
As far as to which park's better, I'm sorry, hands down, Wonderland. Sorry, Luna Park is great for what it is. It's a boardwalk amusement park, but it doesn't have the immersive theming. It doesn't have the expanse of area that, it's an amusement park, not a theme park. Whereas Wonderland, there was like trees. It was a park. It was great. It was like well landscaped. It was very pretty. And although, didn't have all of the bells and whistles that a lot of theming has at theme parks nowadays. It was a really lovely place to go to. Like the architecture that they'd used for sort of their whole entrance and main street, it was very sort of that Cedar Fair kind of building sort of situation. And it was just really well done. And I have, I may be biased. I've got a lot of sentimental attachment to it. But yeah, I think hands down Wonderland was the best.
I would say that Wonderland was superior just because of its size and the variety of its offerings. But that's not so much to tarnish Luna Park. I think what Luna Park has in terms of history and in terms of, I think some of Luna Park's better rides are actually better quality than anything that Wonderland had. So Luna Park's, it's a closer question than you probably think, but Wonderland is a full-scale theme park with a whole collection of rides and theming, and and Luna Park is not. So I would say Wonderland.
This is going to sound very strange. Wonderland is closing permanently. What's your response to that?
Devastation.
I remember when they said Wonderland was closing permanently. I think I was at uni at the time, and I wasn't able to sort of get back the final rides, because I was living out west, going to uni. So I didn't get the opportunity for final rides. But I think I prefer it that way almost, because I didn't see what the park had become from all reports of rides being removed and whole areas of the park being shut down. I think I've got a good memory that has stayed with me throughout the years. That you always want to remember it in the good times, not in the bad times.
The fact that Sydney will no longer have a large-scale theme park, and looking into the future, will not have one for at least 20 years so far, and it's confusing to me why Sydney can't seem to keep a theme park above water.
Did the Wonderland staff seem to enjoy their job?
I think it was a combination of things. I think the performers generally seemed like they were having a good time and committed to the bit when they were doing, performances and shows. Throughout the years, you had sort of teenagers doing ride-ops and stuff. Don't recall overly enthusiastic people doing ride-ops, but I also don't recall anyone just looking absolutely miserable either. But it's like, I think there's only so much you can do to sort of stay on and stay, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when you're sort of doing, loading people into roller coasters or into a drop tower.
Well, yeah, so from the perspective of the friends that I do have that worked there, they loved the place. And I think the little bit of input that I can give as someone who's worked at 2 theme parks myself now is that there are few places that are so tight-knit just very naturally. So I can imagine that the closure of Wonderland would have been like the loss of a family gathering place for those people, because in a job where you're kind of constantly having fun, you get very, very close with the people that you work with. So that would have been tough for them.
What was the most, in your opinion, the most underrated and overrated ride in the park?
I think either of the water rides, the Snowy River Rampage or I believe it was the Flintstones themed flume, is probably the most underrated. I think Snowy River Rampage actually would probably be my complete answer. When you look at the scale of that attraction, I don't think a lot of people really, it's not the first ride that they talk about when they talk about Wonderland, and I think actually that's probably the most well put together attraction at that park. Overrated, I'm gonna hurt some people's feelings. It's the Butch Beast, because that layout of wooden coaster exists already at the other parks that used to belong to Taft Broadcasting and to Paramount Parks at the same time. It notoriously sucks. So it's a boring layout that also runs pretty rough from what I'm told. So I don't think it was a particularly good coaster. I think the nostalgia of it being a very large-scale coaster in Sydney means that a lot of people look at it through rose-tinted glasses. And I think if we had it around today, it would not have the same reputation.
As far as what I think is the most underrated and overrated rides in the park, I'm going to say that underrated was Wizard's Fury, which was the buy-in curve. It was what was known as like the little kiddie coaster, and whether you call it a coaster or a flat ride, it's up to you. It was still pretty thrilling for what it was. So I'm going to say Wizard's Fury was the underrated one. And it pains me to say this, but probably the Bush Beast might have been overrated. It was rough as guts. It really was.
Same when I went on the Grizzly at California's Great America. It wasn't too bad. It was definitely a little shaky. I remember first getting into that seat and I'm like, I can't believe I'm literally riding a Bush Beast clone. Like, this is just insane. Like, I rode the exact mirrored layout of the Bush Beast in America, and that was very sentimental to me. It's not even in my top 10, but still, it's just such a nice feeling.
For what it was great. And for the longest time, it held the place of my favorite roller coaster until I started doing this journey that I've been doing, going around Australia. In retrospect, it was rough, and there were dead spots throughout it. The first drop was amazing, but then sort of as you came around and started doing the loop around before you went to the second drop, it was just like a lot of, okay, here we are, we're just coming around a corner. It wasn't like the relentlessness that you would have gotten from something like Leviathan. For its time, was great, but in retrospect, yeah, a little bit overrated.
You're probably going to be roasting the hell out of this, but what do you think of Sunway?
Whether or not it was intentional that they wanted to close the place, or whether it was just mismanagement, who knows? But I think that they've taken something away from Sydney-siders that was a treasured memory and could have been if they'd actually put investment into it. When it came to the previous owners selling it to Sunway, I think on paper it seemed like a logical decision because Sunway had run theme parks. So they thought that they were giving it to someone where it would be in good hands, and it wasn't the case. Yeah, I think through some managerial decisions, I think that its closure is meant a major loss for the people of New South Wales and Sydney.
The Sunway Group, they are not a theme park operator as far as I'm concerned. They're a group of property developers. They're a very dishonest group of property developers who saw no value in what Wonderland meant to people. They didn't care about the nostalgia that it brought people. They didn't care about the fact that it was such an important place for Sydney-siders and for their families. They saw a large plot of land in a rapidly growing industrial area of Sydney where property prices were already incredibly expensive, and they immediately, their first thought was, let's snap that land up, run the theme park into the ground, demolish it, and sell that land for a big buck. So I think they are greedy, dishonest, and yeah, I hope it was worth it.
Sunway blames Wonderland's closure on everything except poor management. What is your response on this?
Oh my god.
What I love about that interview is that the list of things that they blame gets more and more bizarre and absurd. So, you can argue that things like the collapse of Ansett or that sort of thing, yeah, that might have had a bit of a commercial impact, it makes flights to Australia more expensive, so less international tourists are coming or something like that. But 9/11 and the Iraq War, what are you talking about, man? You're a theme park, and you're on the other side of the world from where both of those things happened. How does that affect you? I don't think that anyone in Sydney was, oh damn, 9/11 just happened, better not go to Wonderland. What? I think you absolutely nailed it with saying they were blaming everyone except for themselves. And I think it's because they knew that what happened was not an accident. They ran that place deliberately into the ground because the land was more valuable to them than the theme park.
But they have a laundry list of how many things that they were blaming the closure on. It was ridiculous. It was September 11. It was the bird flu or something like that. It was the Bali bombings. It was the global financial crisis, an Asian economic crisis. was the Asian economic crisis. It was, they blamed it on everything but poor managerial decisions, which was just a real cop-out if you ask me. Take some ownership. And of course they were never going to. They were going to make it seem like it was everyone's fault but theirs. I think everybody saw through it and saw it exactly for what it was.
Yeah.
And the people of New South Wales and Sydney are worse off for it.
The final question, was there anything in general that Wonderland lacked? And if so, what?
I think for its time, it was doing all right. I would say that I don't really recall any kind of special food offerings. I don't remember there being sort of much outside of general theme park food, and I could be wrong, but I don't recall any sort of nice restaurants or anything like that you would see at sort of, Disney parks or anything like that. Or even sort of some of the restaurants that they have at like Movie World and the Village Roadshow parks. I think the problem was that they just needed to add at least a new ride every year, and they just, in the later years, they just stopped investing in the place, and so there was less and less reason for locals to keep coming back.
I think what Wonderland lacked in both of its ownership games was a steady growth plan. They grew a little bit at first and added a track. What concerned me about what I've seen about in the lead up to Sunway taking over is that their growth was very slow and steady, and what that tends to do is discourage people from revisiting. They'll go once, they'll come back to Sydney again, they'll take a look at Wonderland and be like, nah, been there, done that. And I think the reason, I've just done my own documentary on Dreamworld. The biggest reason why Dreamworld was just such a smash hit for like the first 2 decades of its existence was almost every year they added not just a new ride, a new land, multiple new attractions. They were growing so fast. And that kept people coming back. Like even locals who would go once, be like, cool, we've done Dreamworld. 6 months later, they'd have something new, be like, oh, let's go back then. And I think Wonderland didn't ever quite have that plan forward, that path forward. They added some things, and then they'd go a long time and didn't add anything else. And then under Sunway, they added absolutely nothing. So I think that probably contributed to their crowd sizes dropping.
Could you explain to everyone, what like upcoming projects you have and where we can find you and stuff like that? So at the moment I am working on several projects. My biggest one is something called Coaster Odyssey. I am attempting to ride a roller coaster in every country in the world. Right now it's on a little bit of a break for the European winter, and that'll be coming back with some very exciting and interesting countries starting next year. And I'm also working on a whole bunch of documentaries, roller coaster history videos, all sorts of things. Pretty much all the time. I'm doing this full time almost at the moment, so there's plenty of content if you're interested in theme parks and roller coasters. Maloney's Coasters on YouTube, and I'm also on TikTok and Instagram if you like to interact as well.
At the moment, I'm continuing my journey, traveling around Australia, showing you what it's like to ride coasters as a big and tall person. In the new year, there will be changes to the channel, but I will leave those for a future video. And yeah, it's hopefully in the not too distant future, there will be some international trips as well. So stay tuned to Ejected Bear Time and keep your eyes peeled for those ones.
After wrapping up all the interviews, one thing really stood out to me. Jake and Kieran didn't just provide outstanding insights into the park and its behind-the-scenes history, they brought something extra. They shared deeply personal experiences tied into this place. Although Jake never visited Wonderland himself, he still managed to deliver incredible information by relying on other stories from people that he's really close to. His dedication to ensuring we got the best possible details is truly commendable. Kieran, on the other hand, shared one of the most inspiring and heartfelt stories I've ever heard about Australian theme park history. It was clear how much these memories meant to him, and I'm sure you guys felt that as well. A huge thank you to both Kieran and Jake for taking time out of their day and to be a part of this project. And if you're watching this, you guys are amazing. This has been the biggest project I've ever tackled on, and I couldn't be more grateful for anyone who supported me and made it this far. Do you have any memories of Wonderland Sydney? Let me know in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to Australia Sydney Views so you don't miss any upcoming content. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Australia Sydney Views for more theme park updates and behind the scenes content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.